according to the latest official estimate, there are almost 1 million British Indians and a further 675,000 British Pakistani community. But how difficult is it being brought up in the UK with an Asian background? I came here to Pudsey Grangefield School to speak to Mudassir Mia about how he found being brought up in the UK with an Asian background and how difficult he finds it to pass on his own cultural views and religious beliefs to his children.
I was brought up in a white council estate in North Leeds. It was a nice sort of area, but the people that I was around were very mixed. Some were very educated and were quite multiculturally aware, and others weren't. So growing up in the estate, I'd be amongst young people who, when they were with me, were okay, but because I was the only person that they really came across who was not white, if they saw someone else they weren't familiar with, they were quite happy to use abusive language. And whenever we got into arguments, they'd always resort to racism right at the end, when they ran out of slang words to insult me with, or I'd insulted them to humiliation, then they resorted to racism. So I got a bit of that, and living on the estate, you're known quite well because you stand out like a sore thumb. So if I got into trouble with the wrong person, once or twice would get trouble at the door. So it was quite difficult, but not dire, not extreme. I think I had a pretty good childhood as an Asian. Didn't face that much racism, but like I said, there was always a minority who didn't know how to interact. I think it was not as a person of faith. The faith was quite private, and I've always been quite private about my faith. But the faith became apparent when I went out for the Friday prayer and I put on my traditional religious dress, or if it was Eid, an Islamic celebration, and I'd have lots of family around who'd come all dressed up. And that became apparent then that, okay, these people are different because of what they're wearing and how they're behaving. And you'd often get strange looks, not necessarily verbal abuse, but certainly strange looks, and people would either snigger at what you're wearing or think, you know, why are you dressed like that? And at first, I suppose as a young person, I was rather embarrassed. I wouldn't go to the shop. Like my mum would say, go to the shop for a pint of milk. I'd go upstairs to get changed into my tracky bottoms and then go to the shop. And I did that up till the age of 16 or 17. So just to go to the shop where I knew everyone, but I wouldn't go there in my traditional dress. Only as a university student and as an adult did I start to change that mindset and accept who I was and what my heritage was. And now I'm not bothered. Like, I'll go to my neighbours in my Asian dress and go for a cup of tea or whatever, and it doesn't bother me anymore because I know, for me, that's me, that's who I am. I think it's always a struggle, whether you're a person of religion or not. I think passing traditional values on from any community to the next generation is a difficult one. It's a difficult one for us because my children play with people that are not of the same background at school and in the community, and so what we try and do as parents is proactively get them to engage with people of their own faith and people of their own cultural heritage so they don't forget that. And I think that's really important. So we're trying to give them a balance. Sometimes it feels like a struggle. Sometimes it feels like a struggle. You're trying to tell your child, in my particular faith, we don't believe in sex before marriage, as an example. So for a young girl growing up in the UK, and certainly in the state system, it's like, that's a difficult one to deal with. Oh, you haven't got a boyfriend? Why not? Why don't you have a boyfriend? Have you not had sex? Or why not? And it's like, all of a sudden, you're not normal for doing that. Whereas in other cultures and certainly faiths, this is absolutely normal. And to have sex before marriage and to have a boyfriend is considered a taboo and considered not right because you're not mature enough, or it's going to lead to heartache, or there's issues in society that these things lead into. And that's something we struggle with. But for me, it's all about education, educating my child to understand why we think a particular way and why we believe certain things. And it's up to her to make the decisions. I can't stop her from having a boyfriend. If she wants to have a boyfriend, she'll have one behind my back. So all I can do is educate her about why I wouldn't encourage it, certainly at a young age, and why I wouldn't encourage sex before marriage. So, but at some point she's got to make that decision, as I had to.
There are now around 74,000 teachers from the UK who have moved abroad to work and teach in schools, which are known as British International Schools. It has been predicted that by 2013 the number will have risen by a further 54%, which would mean around 115,000 teachers would have moved abroad to teach. But why is this? Is it due to life abroad? Is it due to money? We put this to Mudassir Mia and asked him if he would ever consider teaching in Kashmir, where his family is from.
I've considered it. I've considered teaching abroad. I've certainly considered teaching in Kashmir. But again, because I've got a family of my own, it's a financial decision, and because of finances, it's not worth my time going over. I think if the girls ever got older and left home and got married and I was still in teaching, I'd certainly go over for a couple of years just to give back to the community over there. But at the moment, just for financial reasons, I've chosen not to do that.
So what I've found out is that being brought up in the UK from an Asian background has a lot of advantages and disadvantages, and that teaching abroad is not always the best option, depending on where you want to go teach. I'm Tom Lawrence, and I hope that this has been an insightful look at how difficult it is living in the UK with an Asian background.